He's trash. The words hit me before I even stepped fully into the dining room. The polished wooden floor gleaming under the warm Christmas lights, the scent of pine and roasted turkey heavy in the air. I froze for a fraction of a second, my hand still on the doorframe, taking in the scene. My ex-husband Mark leaning against the sideboard with that familiar smirk, his new wife Laura beside him, perfectly coiffed and laughing just enough to make it unbearable. My kids, Jack and Emily, sitting at the long mahogany table, giggling, their eyes not meeting mine but shining with that strange mix of embarrassment and amusement. I adjusted the hem of my red sweater, the one I had chosen this morning, thinking about the warmth of family traditions, the familiar sound of the carol music filling the room, and took a deep breath, forcing my shoulders to relax. Tom, my fiancé, standing quietly by my side, hands loosely clasped, his blue eyes steady and calm as he looked at the others, offering no reaction, yet carrying an air of quiet confidence. I stepped fully into the room, my polished leather shoes clicking softly against the floor, and smiled, just a small, controlled lift of my lips, letting the moment hang in the air. The tree twinkled behind Mark, ornaments reflecting the soft glow of the lights, and I noticed a stray ribbon from the garland brushing against a chair leg, a minor imperfection in an otherwise meticulously arranged room. My mind went through the past few weeks, the planning, the grocery runs, the baking of the pies and cookies, the scent of cinnamon and cloves filling my kitchen all morning, the deliberate setting of each plate, the care I had taken to remember who liked what, and the effort it all took to create an environment that felt warm, welcoming, festive. Yet here I was, facing ridicule instead of gratitude, facing mockery instead of recognition, and still, I remained still, measured, letting my observation take in every detail. The way Jack's shoulders hunched slightly as he laughed, the tilt of Emily's head as her eyes darted between me and Laura, the tension in Tom's jaw as he held back a response, the way Mark's smirk never faltered, all of it, forming a tableau I could study, memorize, and use. I didn't rush, I didn't flinch, I didn't open my mouth. I let the words echo in my ears and the eyes in the room follow the current of my composed stillness. The soft flicker of the candlelight on the table highlighted the delicate etching of the china, the silverware polished to a mirror shine, every detail painstakingly set to honor tradition, to honor family, to honor memories. And yet the laughter around me underscored the disparity between intention and reception. I breathed in slowly, letting the warmth of the kitchen waft through me, feeling the hum of the heating system under the floorboards, the quiet ticking of the wall clock marking the passage of a few crucial seconds, and realized that this moment, charged with humiliation, was also a moment of clarity. Tom's eyes met mine briefly, a small lift of his brow, and in that subtle exchange, I recognized the unspoken agreement, the quiet solidarity that didn't need words yet carried the weight of understanding. The smell of roasted turkey, the pine, the cinnamon, all layered into a moment that felt suspended in time, a perfect snapshot of tension and composure, where the world outside the walls didn't exist, and only the controlled breaths, the steady gazes, the poised hands, and the carefully maintained posture mattered. I could hear my own heartbeat in the quiet between the laughs, a slow, steady rhythm reminding me that I was present, that I observed, that I absorbed, and that no immediate reaction was required. Every glittering ornament, every polished plate, every slice of pie on the serving platter became a part of my analysis, my understanding of the social landscape, the dynamics at play, and the potential for the unfolding of my response. I stood there, letting the words linger, letting the energy of the room circulate around me, and allowed a sense of patience to settle, a measured calm beneath the surface that would guide the next move, the first subtle gesture of the plan I had been forming silently for weeks. The room continued to buzz with subdued conversations and the occasional clink of cutlery, yet I remained rooted, watching each movement, each glance, each subtle shift in posture that might betray hidden intentions or unease. The scent of baked ham mingled with the sweet aroma of cinnamon rolls, the steam rising in gentle spirals that seemed almost to suspend time, allowing me to absorb every detail with careful attention. Jack reached for the cranberry sauce, his hand brushing mine, and I noticed the slight hesitation, the quick glance toward Mark, and the almost imperceptible smirk that passed between them, a secret joke that did not include me. Emily laughed quietly at something Laura whispered, the sound brittle and uneasy, and I realized in that instant how practiced they all had become at masking discomfort, at controlling appearances, at keeping up the facade of normalcy, while undermining the warmth that I had worked to create. Tom, standing a step behind me, gave a faint nod toward the fireplace, his eyes conveying the message that he understood the room, the dynamics, and that he was prepared to respond if necessary, though there was no need for immediate action. I inhaled slowly, letting the fragrance of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread fill my senses, grounding myself, reminding myself that I was not just a spectator, but a participant in this carefully constructed social landscape. I noticed the way the silverware caught the twinkle of the Christmas lights, each piece reflecting a slightly distorted image of the room, a metaphor of perception versus reality that mirrored the situation at the table. My gaze wandered to the dessert tray, the pies and tarts arranged with precise symmetry, each serving a testament to the hours I had spent in preparation, yet none of it acknowledged by the laughter and murmurs surrounding me. The subtle sound of footsteps as the waiter carried drinks to the far end of the table gave me a rhythm to observe by, a cadence that allowed me to measure the pulse of the room, the timing of jokes and glances, the ebb and flow of attention. I caught the fleeting glance of Laura toward Jack, a momentary lapse in her otherwise controlled demeanor, and made a mental note of it, cataloging it alongside the other small clues, all of them pieces of a puzzle that I was determined to solve. Outside, the winter sunlight fell at a sharp angle, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the air, an unintentional reminder of the impermanence and fragility of appearances. I let a gentle exhale escape, the sound unnoticed amid the low murmur of conversation, a quiet affirmation of my patience, my awareness, my strategic stillness. Every subtle twitch, every barely perceptible roll of the eyes, every muted intake of breath became part of a narrative that I was constructing silently in my mind, a narrative that would guide my next steps, a narrative that ensured I retained control over my own presence and reaction despite the attempts to provoke or undermine me. The aroma of fresh pine from the Christmas tree behind us mingled with the scents from the kitchen, forming a cocoon of familiarity and grounding, allowing me to stand with measured poise, unaffected on the surface yet acutely aware of every nuance, every gesture, and every unspoken implication. As the conversation at the table shifted to topics of past holidays and shared memories, I noticed the subtle way in which Mark attempted to redirect attention toward trivial disputes, a diversion that had always worked in their favor, and I observed it quietly, recording each misstep, each laugh, each exchange, aware that the smallest details often revealed the most about intent. Tom remained near me, silent, steady, his presence reassuring, yet not dominating, allowing me the space to assess, to reflect, to anticipate, knowing that when the right moment came, action would be deliberate and effective. I sipped my sparkling water, the cool liquid grounding me further, allowing me to feel the rhythm of my own heartbeat in contrast to the nervous energy that subtly pervaded the room, reminding me that composure and awareness were the truest form of strength in this gathering. Every glance across the table, every slight shift in posture, every carefully timed laugh added to the intricate mosaic of behavior I was cataloging, and I realized that patience and observation, in stillness, in measured acknowledgement, was itself a form of quiet power that no mockery or laughter could undermine. The conversation at the table shifted subtly as the initial shock began to settle into a quiet tension, and I noticed the way the low hum of conversation had become a backdrop for the unspoken dynamics playing out in the room. Jack reached for his glass of apple cider, his fingers brushing against the rim with a nervous energy that betrayed his laughter, the forced smiles lingering just a moment too long before fading into polite nods toward Laura, who seemed to be basking in the faint approval she drew from his reaction. Emily fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, her eyes darting from Tom to Mark and back again, as though trying to reconcile the image of me standing there composed, serene, with the undercurrent of judgment that surrounded us. I adjusted my posture, letting the weight of the long evening settle comfortably on my shoulders, observing every minute movement, every shift in expression, cataloging each one with deliberate care. The golden light from the chandelier reflected off the crystal glasses, casting small rainbows across the polished surface of the table, and I realized that the beauty of the setting contrasted sharply with the undercurrent of tension, the invisible currents that seemed to swirl around us in the space between words. Tom remained quietly beside me, his calm demeanor an anchor in the midst of subtle chaos, and his small, encouraging nods reminded me that patience and careful observation were the first steps toward maintaining control over the situation. I allowed my gaze to linger on the intricately carved patterns of the silverware, the delicate folds of the cloth napkins, appreciating the care that had gone into creating a welcoming atmosphere, even as the laughter and comments from the table highlighted the gap between intention and reception. Outside, the soft snow falling past the windows added a quiet rhythm to the room, each flake a silent reminder of the passage of time, the inevitability of movement, and the subtle ways in which moments unfolded without fanfare, yet carried profound significance. I noticed a small imperfection in the ribbon around the centerpiece, a minor displacement that would normally have escaped attention, and smiled inwardly, recognizing that even in apparent disorder, there was information to be gleaned, a signal amid the noise. Mark shifted in his seat, his elbow brushing against the armrest, and I caught the brief flicker of his eye toward Tom, a recognition that perhaps he sensed the undercurrent of observation, though he could not identify its direction or intent. Emily's fork paused midair, her head tilting slightly as she tried to gauge my reaction, and I allowed the pause to stretch, drawing the tension subtly around the room like a tide, letting it wash over each person without breaking my composure. I reflected on the weeks of planning that had led to this evening, the early mornings spent in the kitchen, the hours spent carefully measuring ingredients, arranging decorations, ensuring that each detail would reflect warmth, care, and a sense of family togetherness, only to find that the appearance of civility masked an entirely different reality. I sipped my sparkling water, the cool liquid settling in my stomach, providing a grounding contrast to the swirling undercurrents, and let my thoughts trace the outline of a carefully considered approach, one that would allow me to navigate this evening with grace while maintaining the quiet strength that had carried me through challenges in the past. The soft rustle of the Christmas tree ornaments as a breeze from the slightly open window passed through the room reminded me that even small movements could signal change, and I cataloged each one, each subtle shift in sound or sight, in preparation for the moments that would follow, understanding that observation, reflection, and measured response were the tools at my disposal in a room where appearance and reality did not always align. Every glance, every gesture, every suppressed laugh or controlled smile became part of the intricate map of behavior I was constructing silently, a mental ledger that would inform not only my understanding, but also the careful choices I would make as the evening progressed. I felt the warmth of the kitchen radiating through my sleeves, the smell of baked goods lingering in the air, a comforting reminder of tradition. Yet beneath that comfort lay the current of awareness, a keen attention to each detail, ensuring that I maintained both presence and authority, unshaken by the subtle provocations around me. As the conversation shifted toward past holidays and shared memories, I allowed each recollection to pass through my mind, noting the dynamics of control and influence, the unspoken hierarchies, and the subtle manipulations that had been at work, committing each observation to memory, understanding that patience and careful attention were the prelude to a response that would be measured, deliberate, and unassailable in its quiet strength. I observed the subtle interactions at the table, noting how each person's posture shifted with the slightest remark, how the tension in the room moved like an invisible current threading through laughter and polite conversation. The soft clinking of silverware against china punctuated moments of forced calm, and I let each sound register, marking patterns in behavior, small windows into intent. Tom's calm presence beside me offered a quiet reassurance, his composed demeanor a counterbalance to the delicate storm swirling around us, and I allowed myself to appreciate the steadiness it brought, a grounding force as I navigated the complex social landscape of this evening. The glow from the Christmas tree reflected across the polished surface of the table, creating fleeting prisms of light that danced over the carefully arranged place settings, a visual reminder of the effort and care invested into this night, juxtaposed against the undercurrent of discomfort. Jack reached across for the gravy, his elbow brushing slightly against Emily, and I caught the subtle exchanges of glances, the tiny gestures revealing layers of meaning beneath the surface civility. I noticed Laura's smile tightening at intervals, the calculated inflection in her laughter, the way her eyes scanned the table, seeking affirmation from Mark and the children, as though measuring the success of her subtle provocations. The warmth of the roasted turkey and the spice of the cider filled the air, contrasting with the cool, deliberate stillness I maintained, a deliberate choice to preserve clarity and control. I allowed my gaze to linger on the pattern of the tablecloth, the folds of napkins, the gentle curl of ribbons on the centerpiece, using these details as a backdrop against which the human interactions played out, each movement and expression observed with deliberate attention. Emily reached for her water glass and paused, glancing briefly at me, a silent acknowledgement, a minor fissure in the polished performance of the evening, and I cataloged it carefully, noting the subtle human tendencies that revealed more than words ever could. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, muffling the world beyond the windows, lending a hushed stillness to the scene, a quiet frame that allowed the room's dynamics to come into sharper focus. I sipped my sparkling water slowly, letting it steady my breathing, and observed the micro-expressions that flickered across faces, the faint raise of an eyebrow, the brief tension in a shoulder, the momentary pause in a conversation, all small signals that, combined, painted a full picture of the underlying currents. The soft warmth of the room, the ambient light from candles, the rich smell of baked goods, all of it contrasted with the tension, highlighting the intricate layers of social interplay at work. I remained poised, attentive, letting the night unfold, allowing observation to guide understanding, each detail a clue, each subtle movement a narrative thread, and in that careful, patient stillness, I found a quiet power, a clarity that would guide the next steps with precision and thoughtfulness. The conversation around the table shifted slightly as the evening wore on, a soft murmur of voices interlaced with the clinking of dishes and glasses, yet beneath the polite sounds, a subtle tension persisted, palpable to anyone paying attention. I observed the small movements and gestures, noting how Laura adjusted her posture to maintain an appearance of ease, how Mark leaned back in his chair with an air of controlled superiority, and how the children, Jack and Emily, laughed at intervals that seemed rehearsed, each response carefully measured, each expression a performance. Tom remained at my side, his calm presence a steadying influence, his eyes scanning the room with a quiet attentiveness, noting the same nuances I was observing, a silent ally in the midst of this social ballet. The aroma of the roasted vegetables mingled with the scent of the freshly baked pies, the warmth of the Christmas lights reflecting off the polished wood and crystal, creating a cozy glow that contrasted sharply with the undercurrent of subtle conflicts and hidden agendas. I noticed the way a napkin slipped slightly from Emily's lap, the small shift of her hand as she reached for her fork, the brief pause in Jack's laughter before he turned toward Mark, all of it catalogued silently, forming a map of interactions that would guide my understanding and eventual response. Outside, the wind rustled the bare branches of the trees against the windows, a gentle reminder of the stillness of the world beyond this carefully constructed environment, while inside, each small movement carried a weight that could not be ignored. I allowed my gaze to linger on the patterns of the china, the gentle curves of the silverware, the meticulously arranged decorations, appreciating the beauty of the setting even as the atmosphere carried the strain of social tension, and I realized that attention to detail, observation, and patience were forms of quiet strength that could not be undermined by laughter or mockery. Each sip of my sparkling water was measured, a grounding ritual that allowed me to maintain composure, to absorb the dynamics without reaction, to preserve a sense of clarity in the midst of carefully orchestrated performances around the table. I watched the way Laura's eyes flicked toward Tom and then away, noting the subtle hesitation in her expression, the quick glance at Mark, and the brief tightening of her smile, all indicators of the careful calculations underlying her behavior. Jack leaned slightly forward, attempting to steer the conversation, while Emily responded with cautious interest, yet the undertones of judgment and amusement persisted in each word and movement, a delicate dance that I was both participant in and observer of. I reflected on the hours of preparation, the intentional arrangement of the table, the effort to create warmth, connection, and tradition, and recognized how the outward perfection of these gestures contrasted with the nuanced disapproval and undercurrents that played out in the subtle expressions and behaviors of those around me. Tom gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent signal that he was aware, ready to support if necessary, and I let the calm presence of that acknowledgement settle over me, a reinforcement of measured patience and deliberate observation. Every glance, every pause, every subtle shift in the room became data, information to be held in reserve, understood, and eventually utilized with care. As the evening continued, and the soft hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional laugh, served as the soundtrack to an intricate interplay of awareness, poise, and quiet power that I maintained with deliberate control. As the evening deepened, I allowed myself to shift focus from passive observation to subtle engagement, leaning slightly toward the center of the table, maintaining a serene expression while noting the precise timing of each remark and reaction around me. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg from the pies mixed with the soft pine fragrance of the tree, grounding me as I prepared for careful, deliberate participation in the unfolding dynamics. Jack laughed at a comment from Mark, but the humor felt forced, and I recognized the tension beneath the surface, a silent struggle to maintain appearances. Emily adjusted her posture, subtly signaling unease despite her outward compliance, and I cataloged these small movements as valuable indicators of underlying sentiment. Tom shifted slightly, his hand brushing lightly against mine in a gesture of quiet reassurance, and I felt a sense of solidarity, an unspoken understanding that patience and careful attention would guide our next steps. The flicker of candlelight on the polished silverware highlighted tiny imperfections, a metaphor for the delicate balance between perception and reality that I observed continuously. Each glance, each pause, each calculated smile became part of the larger pattern I was tracing mentally, a map of the subtle manipulations and social cues that defined the evening. I sipped my sparkling water slowly, letting the cool sensation stabilize my focus, and allowed my thoughts to track the rhythm of interactions, noting the fleeting moments when control wavered for others while my own composure remained intact. Laura attempted a joke, her voice light, but the brief hesitation, the micro-expression of doubt that crossed her features, did not escape my notice. I cataloged it, noting the gap between her outward confidence and the underlying uncertainty, a clue to her strategy and the limits of her influence in the room. The room smelled faintly of roasted turkey, fresh bread, and pine, an aromatic reminder of tradition and warmth that contrasted with the undercurrent of observation, patience, and subtle power I exercised quietly. I allowed a small tilt of my head to register as a gesture of attention, small but deliberate, signaling to Tom and reinforcing our shared awareness without breaking the calm of the table. Outside, the snow had begun to fall more steadily, muffling the distant sounds of the neighborhood, leaving only the soft hum of conversation and the gentle clinking of glasses inside, a quiet frame for a complex social interaction. I noticed a faint tremor in Emily's smile, the slight unevenness of Jack's laughter, and the momentary hesitation in Mark's posture, each detail cataloged and interpreted for significance, contributing to an evolving understanding of the room's dynamics. I allowed myself to feel the steady confidence in my own presence, the quiet power in measured observation, and the assurance that when the appropriate moment arrived, every piece of information gathered would inform a thoughtful and precise response. Every aspect of the setting, from the polished wood of the table to the twinkling lights of the tree and the aroma of the carefully prepared food, became part of a larger awareness. A carefully constructed awareness that allowed me to navigate the subtle social maneuvers of the evening with grace, control, and quiet strength. As the evening continued, I allowed my focus to sharpen even further, observing the subtle shifts in body language and tone, the minute changes that revealed intentions and insecurities despite the outward appearance of calm. The soft glow of the Christmas lights reflected off the polished table, glinting across the silverware and the delicate crystal glasses, highlighting every small movement and gesture as though the room itself had become a mirror of the underlying social currents. Jack leaned slightly forward, speaking in a low tone to Emily, their words light but the timing carefully measured, a choreography of responses that I catalogued silently in my mind, noting the pauses, the inflections, the small hesitations that betrayed their thoughts. Laura adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, a minor distraction, yet the gesture conveyed tension beneath her composed exterior, and I made note of it, understanding that each tiny signal was part of a larger tapestry of behavior. Tom remained quietly beside me, his steady presence reassuring, his eyes following the ebb and flow of conversation with a careful precision, and I drew strength from the unspoken alignment between us, a mutual understanding that allowed observation to serve as our shared strategy. I sipped my sparkling water slowly, feeling the cool liquid steady my focus and provide a moment of clarity amid the subtle currents of judgment and amusement circulating around the table. The aroma of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine filled the room, grounding me, a sensory reminder of tradition and care. Yet beneath the surface, the undercurrents of social manipulation and the attempts to provoke or undermine were ever present, and I catalogued them all with deliberate attention. A faint laugh from Emily, a barely perceptible glance from Jack, the micro-expression of discomfort crossing Mark's features, all were noted, stored in the mental ledger that I had been building over the course of the evening, a silent record that would guide the decisions to come. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, adding warmth and a comforting rhythm to the room, yet I remained poised, my attention entirely on the intricate interactions unfolding at the table, understanding that composure and careful perception were themselves forms of quiet influence. I allowed my gaze to drift over the ornaments on the tree, the meticulous arrangement of the table settings, the gentle flicker of candlelight casting shadows that shifted subtly across the room, using these visual cues as a framework for interpreting behavior, for understanding the subtle hierarchies of attention, power, and influence among those present. Each moment of silence, each pause in conversation, each carefully placed comment became part of a larger narrative that I was tracing in real time, allowing me to navigate the social terrain with precision, maintaining presence and authority while observing and interpreting the actions of others. The snow outside continued to fall lightly, muffling sounds beyond the windows, creating a cocoon of stillness that contrasted with the layered complexity of the room, allowing the quiet interplay of gestures, glances, and subtle expressions to stand out, revealing truths that words alone might have concealed. In this environment, every breath, every blink, every controlled movement became a deliberate act of engagement, and I found a quiet confidence in the patient, measured way I navigated the evening, poised to respond when the moment was right, fully aware, fully present, and entirely in control. As the final plates were cleared and the soft murmur of conversation dwindled into polite murmurs and occasional coughs, I allowed my attention to fully integrate all the details I had observed throughout the evening, each glance, gesture, and subtle inflection of voice catalogued meticulously in my mind. The warmth of the room, the glow of the Christmas lights reflecting on polished surfaces, and the gentle aroma of lingering desserts created an atmosphere of comforting normalcy, yet beneath it lay a layer of complex social maneuvering that I had navigated with deliberate patience. Tom remained beside me, a silent presence whose calm energy mirrored my own composed focus, his eyes occasionally meeting mine in brief exchanges that communicated understanding without words. Jack and Emily continued to engage in quiet conversation, their eyes occasionally flicking toward me and then away, revealing glimpses of the awareness that they were being observed, a subtle acknowledgement of the dynamics at play. Laura straightened her posture, her smile carefully maintained, yet the slight tension in her jaw betrayed her awareness that the evening was not unfolding entirely as she had anticipated, and I noted each nuance with quiet precision. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, the gentle rhythm complementing the occasional clinking of glasses and cutlery, creating a backdrop against which the interactions of the table seemed both ordinary and layered with subtle tension. I allowed my gaze to drift across the room, taking in the carefully arranged ornaments, the meticulously set table, the warm glow of candles, appreciating the contrast between the outward harmony of the environment and the undercurrent of observation, judgment, and careful awareness that defined the interactions I had been monitoring. Each small movement, every hesitation in speech, every fleeting glance, was processed and understood in the context of the larger evening, forming a comprehensive map of behavior that I could interpret and respond to at the appropriate moment. I sipped my sparkling water slowly, grounding myself as the evening drew to a close, letting the calm rhythm of my own presence set the tone for the final moments, maintaining composure while the subtle currents of tension and awareness played out around me. The soft hum of the heating system, the faint rustle of branches outside the window, and the lingering scent of pine and baked goods created a sensory landscape that allowed me to remain both fully present and entirely observant, understanding the significance of each minor detail and shaping the overall dynamic. As the last moments of the evening approached, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, having maintained poise, awareness, and subtle control throughout, recognizing that the true strength of the evening lay not in overt confrontation, but in the deliberate, measured observation and the quiet power of presence that I had exercised consistently from the moment I stepped into the room. The snow outside continued to fall softly, adding a serene cadence to the night, and within the room, the interplay of light, aroma, and subtle human behavior coalesced into a final tableau of composed resilience and thoughtful anticipation, a quiet victory born of patience, attention, and the deliberate application of silent influence. As the night drew to a close and the final moments of the gathering approached, I felt the weight of careful observation and measured patience settle into a quiet readiness, a sense of control that had been steadily built throughout the evening. The table, now partially cleared, reflected the warm glow of the Christmas lights and the flickering candlelight, each polished surface catching the light in a subtle dance that mirrored the delicate social interactions I had cataloged so thoroughly. Jack and Emily spoke in hushed tones, their eyes occasionally meeting mine with the faintest trace of awareness, a recognition that they were observed without ever fully knowing the extent of the attention paid to their movements and expressions. Mark straightened in his chair, a subtle shift in posture that I noted immediately, a minor adjustment yet indicative of his desire to project composure, to maintain a semblance of control even as the evening had unfolded outside of his expectations. Laura's smile remained carefully constructed, though I could perceive the imperceptible tightening of her lips, the subtle micro-expressions that revealed a tension beneath the carefully maintained facade. Tom remained a steadfast presence beside me, his quiet energy reinforcing my own composure, a reminder that the measured strength of calm observation was as effective as any overt action in influencing the dynamics of the room. The faint aroma of remaining desserts, mingled with the lingering scent of pine and roasted turkey, created a sensory backdrop that anchored me in the moment, providing a contrast to the subtle undercurrents of judgment and subtle maneuvers taking place across the table. I allowed my gaze to sweep over each individual, noting the minor cues, the pauses, the shifts of attention, cataloging them as part of a comprehensive understanding that would guide any future interactions and decisions. The soft ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the heating system added a rhythm to the room, a cadence against which the interplay of expressions, gestures, and subtle behaviors could be measured and interpreted. Every glance, every sigh, every careful placement of cutlery or glass became meaningful, a thread woven into the broader tapestry of observation and awareness that I had maintained since the moment I entered the room. I sipped my sparkling water, feeling the cool liquid steady my thoughts, allowing the calm persistence of presence to reinforce a quiet but undeniable authority, a control that was silent yet absolute in its impact. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the world beyond and lending a serene stillness that highlighted the intricate dynamics unfolding within the warmth of the house. In this quiet, controlled state, I understood that the strength of the evening did not lie in immediate confrontation or reaction, but in the deliberate, measured accumulation of understanding and awareness, the ability to navigate subtle provocations with grace, and the knowledge that when the appropriate moment arrived, every carefully observed detail would inform a response that was both precise and effective, leaving a lasting impression not through words, but through the power of composed, intentional presence.